All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome back for another episode of Owning Your Sexual Self. I have Dr. Allie back on the show with us today. Hello, hello. Thanks for coming back.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Yes, our last podcast, if you haven't got to listen to that, was on ruptures in relationships. And we did a part two on affairs and how to navigate that. And today we're totally flipping the script. We're talking about champ quality pussy eating, which I'm super excited. When you mentioned that this was a class that you have and something that you teach on, I was like, yes, we have to bring that to the show for sure.
It's one of my favorite subjects, so I'm happy to chat about it.
Yeah, yeah. How did that even come about? Like, obviously, I
Hmm.
feel like I know a generic interest of like why you're interested in teaching this, but I'd love to hear from you.
Yes. Well, I think that when we think about workshops on cunnilingus and folks who are talking about it, it tends to be cis men. And as a queer woman, I feel like I have a unique perspective to be able to offer
Mhm.
both what I call the inside and outside perspective of what it's like to be a champ quality giver, but also what it's like to be a champ quality receiver.
Hmm.
And one of the things I think is so important is to be able to create the conditions that will allow somebody to experience their fullest capacity for pleasure, which does include some technique, but it
Hmm.
also includes connection and warm up and teasing and mental turn on and stimulating blood flow and a deep understanding of anatomy and the science of orgasm. And I think there's so much more of a comprehensive approach that oftentimes gets missed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's so worth mentioning too, because if somebody, right, that the pussy owner, the vulva owner is engaging in intimacy, and if we're not in that state of turn on yet, and our partner is going straight for eating us out, I know I've experienced this personally. I'm like, oh, shit, I'm like not even turned on at all yet. So like this feels like good question mark, but like I know it's so much better when I'm already in that state of turn on. And right, like you said, like the blood flow is good, the nerve endings are activated, like all of that, and I'm more likely to orgasm more quickly, in that sense. So yeah, I'm sure we'll get into all of that.
For sure.
Yeah, so really cool. And so you have a course on this that is a little bit lengthier than what we'll get into today, but
Mhm.
that's something that people, we can mention it again at the end, but that's something people, if they're interested in learning more about, they can go to your website, they can find that, and it just have like a whole master class on this topic. Yeah.
That's right. And I talk not just about champ quality giving, but also champ quality receiving, because
Mhm.
we tend to think of receiving as a very passive experience where either you hope you have a good giver or you kind of endure the experience. And I really think champ quality pussy eating is a combination of having a really dedicated, enthusiastic, skilled giver, but also a receiver who is taking agency over their
Mm.
pleasure and realizing that they can co-create the experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, yeah. And it's being in that receiver mode, if I'm distracted, if I'm not in it, if I'm thinking about other things, it might be hard. So, and I'm curious, you use the term champ quality. Does that stand for something specific?
Well, the name of the workshop is How to Eat Pussy Like a Champ.
Okay,
So
perfect.
I refer to champ quality as though somebody as somebody who is embodying the teachings that I'm offering in the workshop.
Hmm. Yeah. Okay. I wanted to ask, I'm like, maybe champ is an acronym for something that we can
No,
give
it's just a
this, right?
tongue-in-cheek title.
Yeah, yeah, I love it. Okay. So let's start then with the giver side or the receiver side. What do you think is best?
Whichever you prefer.
Okay, let's go with receiver side. And then it's like we're ready to now receive the information for the giver.
Okay, great. Yeah. Well, I think one of the things that's challenging, if you are a vulva owner who has never gone down on other vulvas, it can feel very much like this mystery, this black box, this thing that's happening down there, and I don't know what it is, and it's I want or I don't want either that thing my ex used to do or not do, and it's
Mm,
very hard to be able to articulate what it is that you like. And so one of the things that I offer in this workshop that I think is so helpful is a wide range of hand movements and tongue movements and foreplay so that receivers start to understand what the options are. And I
mm,
also offer a guide to my pussy, which is essentially like a Mad Libs for pussy eating.
mm,
And I've gotten messages from people that said, Oh, I just was hooking up with somebody last night and she handed me her guide to my pussy and it was so helpful, right? So I think that that can be a really helpful way to start to get clear on what your pussy likes. Because one of the central tenets of my workshop is that what a pussy might like changes from time to time
Hmm.
and all pussies are different.
Hmm.
And so
Hmm.
really being able to embrace the diversity of pleasure is so important.
Hmm.
I talk a lot about how to let yourself receive, how vulnerable receiving
Hmm.
can be, and some tips around how do we surrender into it. And I think actually this is where it ties in with champ quality giving. What makes it so much easier to receive is when you can tell the giver is loving giving. Because if the giver is absolutely into it, then the receiver doesn't have to worry about them. They don't have to worry about what they look like or taste like or how long they're taking or if the giver is bored or if it's their turn to reciprocate. And that allows them to get out of their head and be in their body and just enjoy.
Hmm. And from the receiver end, like what would you say are some of those things that stand in the way from us in terms of receiving?
Well, I think there's so much shame that
Hmm.
we are taught, oftentimes from a very early age, about the ways that pussies look or smell or taste, about our role as a lover, of being a giver, of providing pleasure.
Hmm.
And it can just feel like there's a lot of attention on you, which sometimes has folks feel uncomfortable. And so oftentimes it's examining the conditioning that we've received and making active, edgy choices to embody and cultivate a different approach.
Hmm.
I would have to say, of all the skills I offer receivers, which I can share a few more, letting yourself receive is one of the more challenging ones. It takes a little while to unwind that if folks have a hard time receiving. Of course, not everybody does, because that conditioning can be so ingrained. And I think
Hmm.
what really helps somebody start to unwind that is when they have somebody, what I call worship their pussy, right?
Hmm.
Just share how gorgeous it is, how excited they are to pleasure it, everything that they find interesting and attractive and delicious and appealing. And I remember when I was in my early 20s, I had an older lover and he did that for me. It was the first time anybody had ever adored me in that way. And it revolutionized the way that I related to my own body. And it elevated the standards I had for lovers moving forward, which was
Hmm.
just such an important experience to have. And so
Yeah.
I think we think about like, okay, just let yourself receive. This is your stuff to work on. And yeah, there's some stuff for you to work on, but it's also a relational dynamic.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think that that comes up a lot in in a recent podcast that I did around the adoration of it and how just juicy that can feel too in terms of the dirty talk. And I think for the receiver too, as you're hearing these, right, it's like kind of like tell me more, say more. It's just whisper sweet nothings into my ear, right? Like it feels good to receive that validation. And as you're saying, like then that helps to reduce that stress or that worry of like, do I taste good? Do I smell okay? Did I shave? Am I waxed enough? Or is it too much, too little? Like all of those things that might come up for somebody.
Yeah, it's a lot. It can feel like a lot of pressure.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. All right. And you said you have a few other things. So what else for us as receivers? Yeah.
Letting yourself redirect verbally and non-verbally when something isn't feeling quite right to something that would be feeling better. Maybe that means a little higher or a little lower, a little softer, a little slower, or maybe it's can you use your fingers or don't use your fingers or pull out a little bit. And one of the many tools I give givers are ways that you can explore and elicit this feedback from receivers. But even if you're a receiver and your giver didn't take this workshop, there are ways that you can ask for what you want. And I think the reason why people don't is because they're emotionally caretaking their partner.
Mm,
They don't want their partner to feel criticized or, emasculated or um, have their own shame spiral about not being enough. And so they don't give these corrections, but then they're setting themselves up to continue to get more of what they don't like. And
hmm.
the reality is so many givers are desperate for feedback. They just want to
Mm,
know what's working. both because it helps alleviate the pressure for them, but also because it's hot. And this ties right in with revealing enjoyment instead of performing pleasure. Instead of thinking about how you should look, how you should sound, how
Mm,
you should move, letting yourself enjoy what's happening and revealing that authentic enjoyment. Research shows that people who are audible when they're experiencing authentic pleasure experience more pleasure because there's a
hmm
biofeedback loop that happens. And so that doesn't mean that, fake screaming and using porn as your model of what receiving should look like, because that's not very realistic, giving, but to actually just let yourself notice what feels good, get um, immersed in it, get enveloped by it, and just letting it move through you. And if revealing enjoyment and revealing pleasure is something that feels very foreign to you, I recommend doing that when you're masturbating without the
hmm
pressure of somebody else being there and just noticing if I take off the inhibitions, how does my body just want to move? How do I want to push into things or pull into things or like gyrate and hump? And what are the ways that moans and breath and raspiness wants to move through my voice and to explore what actually feels representative of what you're experiencing.
hmm Yeah. Like if this pleasure had a sound, what would it be essentially?
Exactly.
Yes,
Yeah.
I love that when I'm doing embodiment work with people of like, okay, if this emotion had a sound, what would it be? And generally that's like triggering sometimes mostly more negative emotions, like, and it's like, or ah, like just that release.
Mhm.
And yeah, I like that you said like the moans, the rasps, the like ah, like yeah, like the good ahs, you know. Um
Mhm.
yeah, that makes sense. I guess I never heard of that. Like why some people are louder during sex or even during masturbation. Like, and I think I relate to that too, of like, yeah, it does feel like it intensifies the orgasm more or the experience more. And so, yeah, I just made that little connection. Thank you for that, that
My
tidbit of
pleasure.
information.
And I have had some lovers where they just are not very audible or not very verbal during sex. And so then it's really developing some nonverbal body language. So I once had a lover who was very orgasmic, but so quiet and kind of even a little still. It was very hard for me to know when she was orgasming or for how long. So we worked out this cue where she would tap me wherever she could reach me. And she
Hmm
would continue to tap me for as long as she was orgasming, which was helpful because you don't want to change something up in the
hmm
middle of
hmm
somebody's orgasm. You want to stick with the flow. And it's also great feedback for it when a receiver is letting you know, again, verbally or non-verbally, when something is working for them, it helps the giver get out of their head and just enjoy giving. And you create this, what I call a pleasure loop, where you're
hmm
able to each feed off of each other's increasing pleasure, which
mm
only happens when the giver's enjoying giving and the receiver's enjoying receiving, and they both let the other person know that they're enjoying.
mm. Yeah. Yeah, I think that could make also just like for interesting conversation between a couple too, of being able to ask, like if I were to ask my husband, like how do you know when I'm receiving pleasure? Like what cues do I give off that I might not even know that I'm giving off? Um, yeah, I think that would be an interesting, like just fun conversation to have for people because then it's like,
Mhm.
oh, okay, like maybe I want to do more of that to signal that for them, or just again noticing like, okay, I'm unintentionally doing this, but that is healthy for us to know. Yeah, what our body is doing essentially when we're experiencing pleasure.
Yes, because oftentimes we don't know. This brings me to one of the last points I want to make sure to touch upon when we talk about champ quality receiving, which is to share what you enjoyed afterwards. So we can communicate before, during, and after, verbally and non-verbally. And I think verbal communication afterwards is so vitally important to share what you enjoy, to talk about what you might want to do differently next time, to ask what that thing was they
Mm,
did so that you can ask for it again. Or if you're both a receiver and giver, so you could also try it when you're in a
mm,
giving position. And I think we just don't do that enough. And not only is it incredibly helpful, but it's so hot. It's so sexy to talk about that experience that just happened. One of the ways that you could do that is what were some frames that stood out to you as if you were watching it as a film? What were some moments that
Mm,
really felt hot or really felt sexy? And I think this isn't just for the giver, I mean, the receiver, pardon me, it's also for the giver to talk
hmm
about what they enjoyed or what they noticed, to go back to your point around helping the receiver understand their own embodiment and their own
hmm
mannerisms. And I wish there was a sexier word than debriefing because it does not do it justice.
Yeah, yeah. It's like yeah, it's like that sexy aftercare or afterplay.
Yeah.
And so with the debriefing part and like the communicating about it, would you say that it is okay to do that while like let's say still in the bed, like immediately after post intimacy, or is that better outside of the bedroom?
Both and I think it can be
Hmm
so hot afterwards when you're in the
hmm
afterglow and you're just canoodling and having this really sweet moment. But also you could do it afterwards. Sometimes I'll go up to my partner and I'll say, "Hey, remember when we hooked up this morning? That was so hot." And then you get
hmm
to relive it. And it's like you've created a touchstone you get to go back to and get the juice out of that experience.
hmm Yeah. Yeah, I think, and I ask that specifically because I often tell people like like talk about sex more so outside of the bedroom. But I feel now that I'm looking back on that, I feel that's more if we're bringing up negative experiences or like critiquing or not, I don't hope you're not criticizing, but yeah, critiquing, I guess is the best word to use in that. But to share like this is like, and also I think it gives us that time to process and like, how do I deliver this information that might be more difficult for us to talk about. But yeah, I think in post coitus, right? And if you're like, I really didn't like this thing, that might not, yeah, land so well in that moment.
Well, and also, are you couching that in a broader conversation of the things that you did enjoy and the things you
Mm,
are excited to keep doing? I think, that old adage of a compliment sandwich is valuable
hmm
to
hmm
really think about what worked well for you and then say something like, I felt your nails at one point, so maybe you could trim them a little bit more. We could try gloves. And then also, it was so hot though, what you were doing with your finger. I really like that move.
hmm Yeah. Yeah, I like that. The sandwich technique for sure.
Hmm.
Okay. Yeah. So I also want to add in here too, as you were saying, like for vulva owners, so for myself, right? Like I've never given oral sex to another female before. And so I think a tool that I like to use with clients is pleasure mapping. And so walking them through this guided practice to where they're touching their body, genitals and non-genital stimulation. And it's like in this very slow, curious, exploratory way to be able to find out, right? Like, okay, what do I like? Because I think so often when we are masturbating, we go straight for the clitoral stimulation. We go straight for what we know, what we like, and we so little are taking that time to explore just all the rest parts of our bodies, which is just such a magnificent like piece of magic that we have for ourselves, right? There's like pleasure is accessible in so many different ways. And so I think that that could be another good tip too for people that are receiving is doing some of that exploratory. So at least with hands and fingers and pressures and sensations and things like that, um, that could be helpful feedback to give to a partner. And then
For
I wanted to
sure.
ask, oh, go ahead.
Well, I just want to say, I think you're spot on, and I also think what is challenging is that a lot of folks cannot fully explore their own pussy. Like, for example, I
Mm-hmm.
am cursed with very short fingers. I can barely reach my own G spot, and it strains me to reach my own G spot.
hmm
And of course, you can use sex toys, and I celebrate sex toys. I think they're really empowering. And it also doesn't always allow for the subtlety and the dexterity that we may need. And so one of the tools that I give in the workshop is what I call pussy mapping, which sounds like it's somewhat similar,
Mm-hmm.
but more focused to your pleasure mapping.
Yeah.
And so I say, if you imagine that the vagina is a clock, where 12 o'clock is on the upper part where you're going to reach the G spot and the A spot, and then 6 o'clock is down near the anus, right? And then using letters to describe depth. So A is at the entrance, then you have B, C, D, E, F, maybe like J or K is where the cervix is. And
Mm-hmm.
so then what the giver can do is they can give pressure along the whole clock and
hmm
along the whole depth. And what this does for the receiver is it allows them to build neural networks that help them understand subtleties of difference
Mm,
between different places in their vagina. Because even givers, they tend to only focus on the 12 o'clock axis. They do
mhm,
not tend to focus on the full range of the vagina. And I think that that's so helpful. It's deeply embodying for receivers
mhm,
to be able to start to visualize and differentiate between different parts of their own body.
mhm,
And they oftentimes discover things that they like that they never knew because either they
mm,
couldn't reach those places themselves or they never had a giver that was that explorative. And I suggest having a pussy mapping session be different than a champ
mm,
quality eating session because it's not necessarily as focused on let's go for the tens out of tens, let's get as much pleasure as we
mhm,
can. It's more explorative, and you might discover things that don't really work for you, but that's a win because every no helps to clarify your yeses.
mhm, mhm. Yeah. And last thing I wanted to ask around receiving. So I have come across some women in my time that have stated that they just don't like receiving oral sex. It's too much. It doesn't, they don't receive any pleasure from it. Sometimes I've heard like it's too wet, like the spit like just is a total turn off for them. So yeah, curious what you have to say around that.
Yeah, I mean, again, not everybody's going to like everything, and
Mhm,
that's okay. When I work with people with vulvas who don't like having their pussies eaten, oftentimes it's because somewhere along the way they've been shamed or they had a lover who wasn't very attuned or skilled and they had to endure experiences that they didn't like. And if you're
mhm,
enduring sex, any kind of sex, you're going to not like it and you're going to
mhm.
start to resent it or resent your partner or both.
Yeah.
And so it's so important not to be enduring anything, whether it's a technique or as you were mentioning, the wetness. So for
Mhm,
me, I don't want to be too dry because that hurts, but I don't
mhm,
want to be too wet because I am sensitive to different sensations. So my
mhm,
partner will use a towel or use the sheet or have another sensation people often don't like is beards or mustaches. And so,
mhm,
having kind of the sheet in between his face and my thigh so that I'm not feeling the scratchiness of his beard. And if I'm getting too soaking wet, he can kind of wipe me up a little bit.
mhm.
And I think that those are some of the communication pieces that receivers don't ever talk about
Yeah.
because they don't feel like it's okay or it's normal, air quotes normal, to just own some things I like, some things I don't like. Can we work with that?
Yeah. Yeah, and that can be incredibly vulnerable too. Again, just like if you have a person that's just jabbing their tongue in and out of your vagina. I've, I've had that in my time. I'm like, this is what this is supposed to be. Like, don't put me down for this anymore. And then, with the next partner, I'm like, oh, okay, like this is something that I actually can enjoy. And so I do think, yeah, in some cases, like it definitely can be technique, but I hear from the men like if I'm working with them they're like yeah my partner doesn't want to receive oral sex like she's just never had the right partner. I don't think that there's like full truth to that as you're saying. I like that you mentioned yeah likely some shame like likely some stuff to process through rewrite the story the narrative that you're working with. Yeah, and so and two, I want to normalize also that there might be somebody out there that just oral sex is not their thing, and that's okay too. And so yeah, as we've talked about on this podcast, on so many podcasts, like sex, intimacy, there's such a wide range of things that you can do. So if it's not necessarily oral sex, like there's other options out there that you are able to explore.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So shifting into giver, and I know you've already touched on a few things as the giver, but what else do you have for us for listeners that are falling into the category of giver in this?
I think one piece of anatomy that's so important to touch upon is the clitoris on average is around 6 inches long. Now, of course, only a small part of that protrudes from the body. And of course, there's a lot of variety there
Hmm.
around and diversity around how it may protrude from the body, the external clitoris. The internal clitoris wraps around the vaginal canal and has two little spokes that kind of go towards the back of the body. And anytime that person is getting turned on, blood flow is rushing to the internal part of their anatomy.
Hmm.
And the blood flow is pulsing and pushing on the internal clitoris, called female blue balls. It's like that aching, throbbing, like, oh, I just need to be fucked feeling.
Hmm.
And when we can get there, the amount of pleasure we can experience, not just from oral sex, but from touching our vulvas, from all of it, goes up exponentially.
Hmm.
And to realize that that blood flow comes from turning them on, from massage, from foreplay, from slowing down and taking your time and creating buildup. Of course, quickies can be hot too, but there's something to be said for the fact that you can make this pussy begging for pleasure before you're ever even touching it. And
Hmm.
I think that that's a really helpful resource for folks to know and to have. And of course, also when blood flows to the vagina, the blood plasma seeps through the vaginal walls, and that's what creates self-lubrication, which can
Hmm.
make the experience feel more pleasurable as well. Of course, you can use saliva and lube, and there's all sorts of genetic and age factors that affect how wet somebody's going to get. And it's not, I do not appreciate it when folks use that as the only sign of somebody being turned on, because there are
Hmm.
so many factors that can impact how wet somebody can be. But we do want to engage in the kind of activities that can help self-lubrication because it does enhance pleasure.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, and I think that I'm glad that you mentioned that because I do hear that often of like, well, the shame that somebody would feel by not producing lubrication like they used to, or in certain situations, and sometimes yeah, the partner's like placing that shame on them of and taking it personal, like, oh, you're not
That's
turned
right.
on by me, you don't like me, you don't think I'm attractive anymore, you're not liking this experience. And then, gosh, yeah, then that's just the further shame that then the person experiences from that of like the I'm broken phase. And yeah, I definitely don't want you to go down on me or get fucked when I'm feeling in that broken state. So if
That's right.
we could stop that conversation, that would be wonderful.
Yes, and I'm a huge fan of lube, and I think this is one of the ways the spit can be incredibly helpful. And if it's something related to menopause, they have suppositories that can really help. So, just realizing that there are a lot of resources available. But I think what is true is if somebody is too dry, whether it's because they're not having as much self-lubrication or they're not using external lube,
Hmm.
then it's going to feel like there's more friction burn.
Hmm.
And oftentimes, one of the tools I give the givers is called the ruler. So, if a pussy is ready for penetration, so in champ quality pussy eating, you're not always penetrating. Sometimes
Hmm.
people want it, sometimes people don't. But if somebody is wanting penetration when they're ready for it, what I recommend that folks do is they either put one or two fingers in, depending on how much space there is in the vagina, and they gently put it all the way kind of to the depth of the pussy that they can reach. And
Hmm.
they do a slight curve on their fingers so they're touching the 12 o'clock axis.
Hmm.
And they're very slowly, with just enough pressure that the receiver can feel it, but not so much pressure that it's intense. They're slowly pulling out and they're asking the receiver to indicate where it feels good. So when I
Hmm.
do this on a person, they might say, ooh, ooh, there. And then they'll wait a minute and they'll be like, oh yeah, yeah, there too. Or no, 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 that doesn't feel good. And it's so helpful because as somebody gets more turned on, where they are in their monthly cycle, all other factors are going to
Hmm.
impact where in that vaginal cavity it's going to feel good at any given time. And oftentimes, what people will experience is the deeper in feels too sensitive. Sometimes it feels like a burning sensation or it feels painful. And so, until they get more turned on, they may want to have stimulation more towards the front of their vagina, the G spot, or sometimes even at the entrance will feel
Hmm.
better.
Hmm.
And so, and it's so helpful to do this because it's communicating to the receiver, I'm eliciting your feedback. I care about what feels good for you. We're taking our time. Fingers are so much more dexterous than penises, right? I
Hmm.
can do way more things with them. And so I'm going to use that to my advantage.
Hmm.
And it starts to open up those lines of communication and normalize exploration.
Yeah. And so that's like, I feel like partnered pleasure mapping, really. And I
Exactly.
love that ruler technique. So inserting vaginally, hitting up into that G spot area, and then slowly removing out. And so that the
Or
person that's receiving is like, yes, there.
exactly, or even deeper than the G spot. So when we think about the
Mm-hmm.
anatomy, there's, the pelvic bone, and then on the other side of the pelvic bone is the G spot, which stands for Grafenberg, who is this male
Hmm.
scientist that thought he invented it. We know better. And then past the G spot is called the A spot. That stands for anterior fornix. And I always tell folks the G spot, if you put your tongue on the roof of your mouth towards the front where you feel those ridges, that's what the G spot feels like, but softer. So it's textured like that.
Hmm.
And if you put your tongue on the roof of your mouth farther back where it's smooth and wetter, that's what the A spot feels like. And then if you go even deeper, you'll reach the cervix. And the cervix will feel like a thumb. You can kind of stimulate it in a 360-degree fashion. And the more turned on a person is, the more that cervix is going to distend into the vaginal canal and be more accessible. And so you can even go much deeper than the G spot and explore
Hmm.
the full 12 o'clock axis. And,
Mm.
a lot of people with pussies do not like cervical stimulation, but there has been some research that has shown that on average, and I wish I could have been a part of this research study, but on average, it takes 45 minutes for somebody to want to be ready for cervical stimulation. And we
Mm.
know oral sex in general is much, much shorter than that on average.
Yeah.
So I just think a lot of folks aren't experiencing the conditions that might make
Mm.
it more likely for them to enjoy that kind of stimulation.
Yeah. Yeah, I had a colleague that was really curious in exploring cervical orgasm, and they did it in the realm of, I mean, it was like a couple hour process that they did. They created some sex magic rituals around it. It was very like tantric, like very connective exercise. They were really taking their time with it. Um, Psychedelics may or may not have been involved a few times as they're exploring this, but yeah, and the feedback that she got, that she gave, like it was the first time, like a very emotional experience for her, like having that, what I call is a crygasm, like that emotional release. And yeah, I can see where maybe some of the hang up is around it. Because when I first heard of cervical orgasm, like, ooh, it kind of reminded me of like going to the gynecologist and getting my cervix scraped. I'm like, that doesn't, like, I do not associate pleasure with that. And so I'm like, how would I like this? And I think it's a good point of like there's certain days or certain times of the month, certain sexual experiences that myself and then as we're now discovering others like actually want that deeper penetration. And I would also add like certain positions allow for that to feel more comfortable versus others.
That's right.
If it's happening during
And
penetrative sex.
I think it's helpful to realize that there are four main nerve pathways involved with orgasm for somebody who has a vulva and vagina. And the pelvic nerve orgasm, pudendal nerve orgasm, hypogastric, and vagus. So the pudendal nerve is the most towards the exterior. So external clitoral, entrance to the vagina, entrance to the anus. When you go a little bit deeper into the vagina and anus, you're going to reach the pudendal nerve. I'm sorry, pardon me, the pelvic nerve. And then when you go deeper, you're going to reach the hypogastric. And then the deepest is the vagus nerve. And the vagus nerve orgasm is associated with cervical orgasms. And
Mm,
it's the vagus nerve or does not actually go through the spinal cord. So you could be a paraplegic and still have a vagus nerve orgasm. And
mhm,
what the vagus nerve does is it wraps around the digestive system, the heart, and it comes up to the brain along the neck. And the vagus nerve is associated with emotional regulation. It's
mm,
associated with sounds and moaning, maintaining certain like whether you're humming or singing or chanting or moaning, you're activating the vagus nerve.
mm, mhm,
And so oftentimes when somebody's having a vagus nerve orgasm, they will laugh, they will cry, they will have a big emotional release. And it really is moving through their emotional body in a way that's very different than other types of orgasms. I
Mm,
think when we think
hmm
about sexual healing, this is one way that that can
hmm
come into play because, of course, we store trauma on the cellular level of
Yeah.
our bodies. There's a lot of stuck emotions. And so using this form of embodiment, exploration, and pleasure can be incredibly therapeutic.
hmm Yeah. Yeah. And you're not, I remember my first time experiencing a crygasm. I was like, what the fuck is wrong with me? Like, what is happening? I thought I was like doomed for life. Now I'm always going to cry during sex. Like I felt just so, it was definitely like a beautiful experience. It was something that happened between my husband and I, but I just remember feeling like, whoa, what does this mean in the moment? And then, yeah, after doing more of the emotional processing and for intimacy to continue even after that experience, it really, really helped to just normalize what I was experiencing. And yeah, thank God for therapy and like being a sex therapist and having this community of women that I can go to with these things to talk them out. But yeah, very, very
Yeah.
cool
And so if you're a
experience.
giver and your partner starts to laugh or cry, don't feel like you messed up or you did something wrong or
Hmm
try to rush to fix it. Let them have the fullness of that expression and hold space for it and silently pat yourself on the back for a job well done of creating those conditions for them to feel so safe to have that
hmm
level of release.
hmm Yes. Mm, so good. Who knew that a podcast on pussy eating could become like this emotional topic now that we're in?
This is why we need people who like to give
Yes.
and receive to be teaching these kinds of workshops.
Yes. 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 Awesome. Well, I know you have some things that you wanted to share with us at the end here. Is there anything else that you wanted to cover on giver, receiver? I feel like this has been an amazing, amazing episode so far, but if there's any last minute thoughts that you want to go over.
Well, I will say that this is a 4 hour long workshop. So,
Hmm
of course, we're not going to be able to touch into everything in this podcast. But I do think one of the important pieces is also to feel comfortable to be able to mix it up. So, knowing a wide range of hand and tongue movements, a lot of different positions that can be really
hmm
helpful and offer different kinds of advantages. And knowing that you can use toys. If your mouth is getting tired, if your hands are getting tired, have your G-spot stimulators, have your vibrators, have your clit suckers, have your toys available for you so that you can give the receiver the full extent of the pleasure they want without feeling like you're straining and then therefore not able to enjoy it anymore.
hmm
And if your wrist is tired, if your forearm is tired, one of the best tools to be able to go longer is to take your non-dominant hand and put it around the wrist of your dominant hand. Because otherwise, if you're not doing that, it's just all forearms and wrists and
hmm
fingers, and you're going to tire out so much faster. But if you give
hmm
yourself that wrist support, not only is it good support, but now you're using the forearms and the shoulders of both arms. And
mm
it allows you to go for so much longer in a way that feels more sustainable. So I think that's a really helpful tip.
Yeah, definitely. Yes, because we want you to be down there so long that you are starting to get tired. That means you're
Yes.
taking your time and you're exploring and trying different things. So, yeah, great,
Hmm.
great tip. Thank you so much. And
Yeah.
if somebody wants to take the course, like you said, this was just a taste of it. Where do they go? How do they find you?
So you can go to my website, TurnOn.Love, and when you go to the Learn tab, you'll see on-demand workshops. These are a bunch. I think I have almost 20 workshops you can rent from home, including how to eat pussy like a champ. And then I also teach it in person in the Bay Area. Sometimes
Mm,
I travel to teach it as well, which is really special and fun. And so that's a great way to be able to access this content no matter where you are geographically. And then the other thing I want to point folks towards, well, there's two other things. One is I'm doing a retreat in April with my
mm,
partner, who is also an intimacy coach and educator, called Sustainable Intimacy Reignite the Flame for the Long Game, which is for
mm,
couples who want to learn how do we get that spark going? How do we keep it alive? How do we navigate the various libido blockers, the things that get in the
mm,
way of our pleasure? And how do we create the conditions that allow for our desire to come online and navigate differences in libido or differences in desires and some of the other challenges like pressure that can come up around intimacy and long-term relationships. And
mm.
I have a $200 discount code through, or not discount, it's just an early bird discount. There's no code needed through
Hmm.
March 15th. And so I want to encourage your listeners to check that out. If you go to under the Learn tab, you'll see Sustainable Intimacy, and the retreat information is there. You can also rent that on demand if you're not able to come to California for the retreat. And then I also offer coaching for individuals and couples and polycules to help them learn how to create and sustain the kind of emotional and sexual intimacy that they want. And it's an experiential practice. So I'm doing a lot of skill building, really helping folks realize intimacy is a skill, like any skill, something we can
Hmm.
get better at with proper instruction and practice, but also helping them do some of the deeper work at looking at what are some of the obstacles that come up that can make it hard to actually implement the skills. Things like attachment styles, trauma history, shame, insecurity, family dynamics, religious and cultural influences, all of those pieces that have a role in the way bodies and sex that we want to be intimate with.
Hmm. Yes, thank you so much. And all of that at your website, TurnOn.Love, we can
That's
find all
right.
the information there.
That's right.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Ellie, for coming on the show again. This was a very fun topic. I'm sure we'll have a lot of listeners on this one. So,
It was
and they're
quite
gonna
literally
walk
my
away with
my
so many good things.
pleasure. Thank you.
Yes.
I love
Yes.
your podcast. I love what you're doing, and you're such a fun host. And so this was a joy, and hopefully I can come back again sometime soon.
Yes. Thank you so much.